it's a lot of movement of dirt, and that makes a lot of dust. I've been knocking on doors in this Winnick area there behind Bryce Job, and I'll tell you what, I had to leave. I can't imagine living in that kind of stench. And I understand it's not there all the time. Man, when it is, that's unbelievable. The problem with that dump is that it's tied to the community financially. True, it's about 80% of their budget from dumping fees, the fees that they get from that landfill. That's a tough thing to do, to get rid of your 80% supplier. So perhaps the state needs to come in and say, if that is to close, we can put some funding together, maybe private partnership, public partnership kind of thing, to alleviate some of that. The other thing is we have to give DeNaples a chance to move his money. If we had the authority to say it closes today, that wouldn't be the right thing to do either, because the man has money invested in there. But I really would like to see a 10-year end-of-life program, where at some point the decision is made from now, 10 years from now, it's gone. And that gives him time to move his assets to some other business without hurting him. Because I'll tell you what, if he gets that 50-year expansion, you all know what's going to happen. He's going to sell it to Waste Management or somebody else. God bless him, he's made a ton of money, and he's a very generous man to the area. But that's not the kind of business we need here. And again, involvement by the population is going to make a difference. It has already. And that's all I have to say on that. I keep forgetting to look at the time.
Mr. Mullins, any rebuttal? Next question, Mr. Lemoncelli. There is an incredible abundance of natural gas in the Marcellus Shale region of northeastern Pennsylvania. In consideration of the fact that there is no current natural gas extraction tax, no taxation of the pipeline to transport the gas often to be exported to foreign countries, and no minimum host agreement standards for the burning of this gas at power plants that produce power for the PJM grid, which sells power to 13 states and the District of Columbia, do you think Pennsylvanians are being compensated properly for hosting all of this infrastructure? And what do you think a sensible energy policy for Pennsylvania looks like?
One of the questions that continues to come up is, how do we get more revenue from the gas companies? But the real question about the severance tax is not how much can we get, who's going to control the money. Right now we have an impact fee. The impact fee goes to all 67 counties in the state. By law, 60% of the money they get goes to the counties that are directly involved in the gas production. The other 40% is divided up among the rest of the counties. That money is by law only allowed to be spent on certain things. There's 13 items. It includes environmental and social programs. It includes emergency preparedness and response. It includes infrastructure. And that that tax has given Lackawanna County almost $1 million so far. While an extraction tax is a volumetric tax, it's a tax on how much gas comes out of the ground. We have 0 operating wells in Lackawanna County. If it goes by how much gas comes out of the ground, we're not going to get a penny. The difference, though, is that the extraction tax is controlled by Harrisburg. The impact fees are controlled locally. I would much rather local control, and I'll give you an example of something that really frosted me at the end of September. I'm a member of the committee to raise money for the Archibald Veterans Monument Park. We have been raising money for well over a year with chicken barbecues and raffles and all kinds of things. And this park is going to be 2.1 acres. We have Lockheed has agreed to give us over 2 acres of land. And we applied for a grant, community development grant, $265,000. $5,000. We checked with the people that accept the grants. They said, well written, great grant. I got a call as I was driving. I had to pull over. Robbie Turlin, who's really the spearhead of this thing, called and he said, the grant is out. I said, really? What do we get? You're not going to believe it. He said, we get the whole thing? Because we got nothing. Nothing. Who's in control of that? Who made that decision? It was his boss, his mentor, John Blake. John lives in Archville. He told us he was for the project. But we got zero. $1,000 would have validated that program, and it didn't. And that's about all I could say because I ran out of time. But that's the difference between local and Harrisburg decisions.
Mr. Mullins.
I'd like to get back to the energy policy question here, but it's important first and foremost to remind my opponent that if he has a problem with Senator Blake, he's running for the wrong office. So that's something very critical, and I'd like to get that out of the way once and for all, but I have a feeling I may have to remind him throughout the night. As it relates to energy policy, we have gone without a fair severance tax for far too long. I am in favor of compensating our citizens for a valuable resource that is being taken from the ground under us. It would not be an unreasonable tax so as to stifle the industry. I believe it should be price sensitive, a proposal that was within one vote of being passed last year. So I hope we can pick up where we left off and get back to a good place on there, and we start collecting what is due to us at the state level. As it relates to host agreements and power substations and pipelines, our lack of minimum standards on those things I mentioned is paying for better schools and education in Maryland and other surrounding states. So by us not being more progressive and insightful and foresightful to that end, we are missing out on opportunities. As it relates to power plants, I believe that much of the fight and the debate and the ongoing, lingering damage done that has divided the town of Jessup, our valley, friends and families, could have been avoided if the state had thought ahead and come up with minimum host agreement standards. That included participation by the school district and surrounding communities. I believe that would have helped Jessup and the rest of us to get a fair shake. So that is something I look forward to introducing as a state representative, and that appears that's my time. Thank you.
Mr. Lemoncelli, rebuttal.
Just a couple of quick things. The Independent Fiscal Office, which is a state organization that checks all the numbers, projects that the impact fee will bring $209.6 million to the state this year. The director is Matt Nattel, and he also said in April of 2018 that if a severance tax were imposed, it would bring $210 million. It's the same number. We have now low-cost heat for our homes, our farmers, and food production have low-cost energy, and manufacturing as well. I oppose a minimum host agreement, and the reason why is because if you set a minimum, that's what you're going to get. That's set also the maximum. I want to have instead a best practices handbook, because I saw in person that we need to know what to expect from these plants. What's the next level of permitting, and what can we expect when they start up?
Mr. Mullins. And you have the next question. Every election season, citizens or candidates talk about property tax relief and nothing but repeated buzzwords and talking points. In simple language, what do you believe responsible and achievable property tax relief looks like, and how will you work with representatives on both sides of the aisle to make it happen?
So legislation takes 26, 102, and 1. 26 votes in the Senate, 102 in the House, and 1 signature by the governor. To date, the current proposal for property tax elimination was unable to achieve that milestone, either within either party or on either side of the building. So what do we do from here? This is when it's time to compromise and work toward an improvement. I understand the burden of property taxes. My wife and I pay them. I have a 91-year-old grandmother on fixed income who pays property taxes and struggles to make those payments every year as well. So I understand that it is a crushing burden for some. The current proposal, I believe, has much room for improvement. I think we should focus just on farmsteads and primary homesteads. So the millionaire from New York or New Jersey who has a vacation home in the Poconos doesn't get a complete property tax elimination. So the renter down the street from here who works 2 and 3 jobs can only see their sales tax and income taxes increase. I've got a problem with that. That's not fair. What I am in favor of is a much more manageable and affordable program in just focusing on primary homesteads, providing some relief to renters, as some replacement revenue will be required. But the fact is this: I will be supportive of meaningful property tax reform as long as it doesn't jeopardize the school funding that my child in a few years will be on the public school system to ensure that his education doesn't suffer, or that the current proposal doesn't lock in artificially low, unequal ways that we fund our school. The disparity between rich and poor school districts is far too vast. We are on the losing end here in our area, in the 4 school districts that the 112th district encompasses, and no child's education is more or less valuable than the others. So there is a way toward meaningful property tax reform. We just need reasonable people from both sides of the aisle to come and finally get something done. And that's what I look forward to getting down there and doing.
Mr. Lemoncelli.
Well, I'm going to bring them up again, I'm sorry. What really frosts me is that this property tax reform could have been in place in 2015. There was a vote, and it was cast 25-24, one abstention. The one that voted against it was John Blake. There are about 10,000 people a year that lose their homes to property tax. So that's 3 years, 30,000 people. That's insane. Since 1993, property taxes increased 146%, and average weekly wage has increased 80%. It's not sustainable. We have property rights in this country, and once you buy the property and you own the property, nobody should be able to take it away from you, including the government, for taxes. Nobody should lose their house for taxes. The school property tax can be moved over to sales tax by increasing it 1%. And the sales tax in the 50s was brought up exactly to cover education. You can add another, 1.27% to the income tax, and it covers dollar for dollar what we're putting into the schools now. And but what if the economy gets bad? Well, guess what? The sales tax always increases because prices are increasing. The same percentage today for this 20-cent bottle of water, tomorrow that's a $2 bottle of water, you still get 6%. So that really frosts me that this could have been done years ago. And it was bipartisan, everybody was involved, everybody liked it, didn't happen.
Mr. Mullins, rebuttal.
Thank you. And again, I'll just remind everyone that one vote can't do that. 25 Republicans and Democrats voted against that bill. That's very critical, and that's how the legislature works. Secondly, I think this $2 bottle of water, that adds up for someone on a fixed income. It adds up for that renter who I mentioned, who's working 2 and 3 jobs just to make it through in life. So to do that, to implement such regressive tax increases and allowing the Sheets and the Walmarts and other corporate concerns out there off of their property tax burden, it also concerns me, which is why I come back to homesteads and farmsteads as a form that we should look at.
Mr. Lemoncelli, would you like another rebuttal?
I've talked to plenty of senior citizens who have paid this tax for decades and have no children in school. They are on fixed incomes, they can't afford it. They have to pay. And basically, you know what, a lot of people weren't supposed to, but they have only Social Security. And it's not a lot. And by the time you pay utilities and drug costs, you're out of luck. You're out of money. And so what are we going to do? Oh, you don't pay your taxes? We're going to kick you out of the house. We're going to take the house. Where are you going to go? Florida? You're not going to go to Florida. You have no money. You're going to go to a nursing home. And guess what? There's not enough nursing homes to put everybody in there. I want to stay in my house when I'm old until I can't stay there anymore. When I need critical care, I'll go to a nursing home, but not before. And these people don't want to do that either. And they don't. And they shouldn't be pushed out of their house at all. And as far as helping out corporations, what do you have against corporations? There's a lot of corporations. You know what? The guy that cuts your hair is a corporation. The guy that fixes your furnace is a corporation.
Mr. Lemoncelli, your time's up.
I'm sorry. Take care.
The next question. Since the last Citizens for Healthy Jessup debate, I'm sorry, I went out of line. Let me get this one. As funding woes continue for school districts in the Pennsylvania 112, taxpayers have witnessed school boards taking on new debt for raising their taxes to meet obligations, often while still cutting jobs and programs, including school libraries. In a letter to the editor of this past Sunday's Scranton Times, current Scranton School Director Paige Gephardt-Gagnetti had this to say on the subject, quote, "The real enemies of our public school system are legislators in Harrisburg who do not prioritize education and a federal Department of Education laser-focused on privatizing. What do you think the solution is to Pennsylvania's education funding problem?" Mr. Lemoncelli, you're first.
Well, I think that's pretty rich that she's blaming everybody but the school district here. It's obviously someone else's fault that we ran out of money in Scranton. School funding this year is, I think it's very good at this point. We have almost $6 billion of funding, and just about every part of it has increased. Again, if we move to a sales tax and an income tax, we will replace the property tax that hurts so many people, and it will replace it. It will replace it dollar for dollar. It's not like we're going to take a hit. However, you have to be aware that there's a funding formula, and I think Wolf had mentioned that he wanted to run all the money through the new funding formula. And if that's the case, our districts are going to lose a lot of money. For instance, Valley View would lose $88,000, and Mid Valley $101,000 if all of the money went through the new funding formula. There's a basis funding formula, which gives you all the money you were supposed to have, and then the new money, the additional money that's budgeted, goes into the new funding formula, and that really does help more the big cities rather than the rural and poorer communities. So the funding, I think, at this point, thankfully, they finally figured it out. I wouldn't mind having a 2-year budget for schools. We're not going to stop educating the kids. Why can't we do a multi-year budget? Then you don't end up with the situation of these guys can't get together about all the other parts of the budget, and the schools have to borrow money and go in debt. Give them a 2-year budget.
Mr. Mullins.
Thanks. I think my opponent here, and I agree here on a number of points in that it would be irresponsible to direct all of the education subsidy through the fair funding formula. The way it works, the way it was passed a few years ago, education, any new dollars, any incrementally new dollars will flow through this fair education funding formula. It will take decades for that to finally get to a point where we are funding according to student demands and student needs in a fair way that was arrived at by a Republican bipartisan bicameral commission. So we were able to, over the last number of years, and it should be continued, restoring the $1 billion in cuts to public education, made implemented by the former governor, Republican Tom Corbett, and we must continue our work of restoring and reaffirming our commitment at the Harrisburg level to the public education system. It's required by our Constitution, and years ago we were funding education at about 50% coming from the state, coming from Harrisburg. Now it's around 30%. And who's left holding the bag? Property taxpayers. That's why I'm talking about so many solutions. We can come at that problem in so many ways, and we have to. So I support that wholeheartedly, including steering more dollars through the fair education funding formula, but without going so far as to hinder or create a loss for any of our school districts.
Mr. Lemoncelli?
One of the things we have to realize is if we miseducate the children now, they stay miseducated. There has to be a sense of urgency because you have 4 years of high school. If you don't fix the problem sometime during that 4 years, the kid's gone. You're on to the next batch. I think it's important to teach also a broad curriculum that includes music and art. There's an Italian word called brutto, and a lot of you know what that means. It's a brute. We don't want to raise brutes. We want to have people that have some idea of the culture that we came from, the culture that we are. And you know what we have to take care of is the teachers. The teachers are, for lack of a better word, I don't even want to say it. They're taking care of your kids. They're your nannies almost. And we have to fund from the bottom up. The children, the teachers, and the less to administration.
The next question. Since the last Citizens for Healthy Jessup debate held April 19th of this year, there have been at least 10 shooting incidents in schools in the United States that have resulted in injuries or fatalities. What responsibility do you think Pennsylvania lawmakers have in relation to making schools safer from repeated incidents of this type? And specifically, what would you propose as a solution? I believe you're on, Mr. Mullins.
This is something very personal to a parent who's contemplating sending their kid to a school in a few years. And I hope that these mass shootings become nothing but a dark page in the history books when they read about them in school, rather than having to worry about whether they'll come home alive from school. I believe in our Second Amendment, and I believe our guns are safe when we're safe with our gun laws. I believe we have to take a very serious look at expanding background checks, closing the gun show loophole, things that reasonable minds should agree to at least debate in Washington and in Harrisburg. It took, the amount of time it took that for a bill that I would have supported wholeheartedly to remove firearms from PFA offenders and put them in the hands of law enforcement instead of safekeeping the families. You wouldn't believe the struggle that common sense piece of legislation took. So I'd like to get down there and work with reasonable lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who also are going to do and will be sending their children to school and want their safety. We should also be mindful in next year's state budget to continue our commitment toward the Safe Schools initiative, which drove millions toward school districts for security improvements.
Mr. Lemoncelli.
We need to do a better job enforcing the gun laws that we have so we can protect the rights of law-abiding citizens to bear arms while we keep the firearms out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them. Background checks. Let me tell you about background checks. You can check the backgrounds all you want. The database you have, it tells you how good the background check is. And there is no database in this country that has all the mental health records in it, period. It doesn't exist. So you can check the Pennsylvania instant background check, you can check the federal instant background check. It doesn't have the data. That's partly because of HIPAA laws. It's partly because nobody's concentrated on getting all that data in one place. And again, it has to be protected. So there's a lot of problems in doing that. But background checks are as good as the data you check. Now, we have to stop talking about mental health and gun control and bigger magazines before it's too late. There is a maniac out there now, someplace, and he's going to show up at one of these schools soon. And I hate to hear it, and I hate to think it, but we have to protect our kids, and we already know how to do it. We need to do the same thing to protect our kids that we do to protect our politicians in Harrisburg, the courthouse in Lackawanna County. There's a one point of entry. At that point of entry, you have a drill. At that point of entry, you have a metal detector, and you have armed guards. You have that in Harrisburg. They're protected very well. You protect all the people in the courthouse. We have government buildings called schools. Let's protect them as well as we protect our politicians. And you know what? If they say there's no funding for it, then let's pull that security out of the Capitol and start putting it in the schools. And I'll bet you it's found very, very quickly.
Rebuttal, Mr. Mullins.
Sure, I think that without a doubt, he gets to my point to some degree on increasing school safety. But the rhetorical question I have, and that I'll pose tonight is, why does this happen so much here in the United States of America? Why here? Why so much here? There's an answer out there, and I'm really trying hard to find the solution around that answer. It can't be